Sheldon Cooper narrates his own childhood. He controls everything you see, everything you hear, everything you believe about his family. And the theory that changes the entire show is this: he's been lying to you the whole time, not out of malice, out of survival. The Big Bang Theory gives us a George Cooper who is barely functional, a distant, dismissive father who drinks too much and cares too little. A man Sheldon describes with cold detachment, the way you describe someone who left a mark and nothing else. Then young Sheldon premieres and gives us a completely different person. George Cooper Sr. and young Sheldon drives hours to Houston to barge into a NASA scientist's office so his son can be heard. He defends Sheldon in rooms where nobody else will. He shows up, consistently, warmly, with more genuine emotional intelligence than anyone else in that house. The discrepancy between the two George is so wide that the show addressed it directly, multiple times, without ever fully resolving it. The theory that resolves it is the one that hurts most. Sheldon deliberately misremembers his father, not because his photographic memory failed, because he chose to override it. A man who cannot process grief the way normal people do, who cannot sit in loss, who deflects and intellectualizes everything painful, found the only way he knew to make his father's death survivable. He made George smaller in his memory. He turned the man he loved more than he could ever say into someone it was acceptable to lose. If George was already a failure, already half-absent, already the lesser version of a father, then the real George's death doesn't have to devastate Sheldon completely. It already happened. Slowly, quietly, in Sheldon's own mind. Long before the heart attack, Missy Cooper is the most important character in the entire show. And the show spent 7 seasons treating her like a punchline. This theory isn't comfortable because it requires watching young Sheldon differently, not as a comedy about a genius kid, as a tragedy about his twin sister. Missy was born at the same time as Sheldon, in the same house, to the same parents. From her first breath, she was placed in the shadow of someone the entire family built their identity around. Mary's energy goes to Sheldon. George's conversations go to Sheldon. Mima's pride goes to Sheldon. The show is literally named after Sheldon. And Missy, who is smart enough to understand exactly what is happening to her, who is emotionally perceptive in ways her twin will never be, sits across the dinner table from all of it every single day, and finds ways to be funny about it because the alternative is falling apart. The actress who played Missy, Reagan Revord, said in interviews that it breaks her heart, that Missy spent her whole life ignored because of her brother, and the one person who truly saw her was her father. And then he died, and Mary retreated into religion, and Sheldon left for Caltech, and Missy was a teenager, alone, in a house that had just been emptied of everything that made it worth staying in. By the time the Big Bang Theory mentions her, she's a waitress with multiple children and a string of difficult relationships. The show presents this as a quick biographical update. The theory says it's the entire story of what happens when a child is brilliant enough to understand she will never be the priority, young enough that it shapes every decision she makes after, and strong enough that she never lets anyone see how much it cost her. Missy Cooper is the real protagonist of young Sheldon. She just never got to narrate. George Cooper didn't cheat on Mary because he was a bad husband. He cheated because his marriage had already ended in every way that mattered, and nobody in that house would admit it. This theory builds slowly but lands with full weight once you see it. The Big Bang Theory establishes that Sheldon once walked in on his father with another woman. This moment, which Sheldon references with quiet devastation, is framed as a betrayal, as a moral failing. As the thing that made George the lesser man Sheldon describes for 12 seasons, young Sheldon had to eventually build toward this moment, and the seasons leading up to it show something the betrayal framing conveniently ignores. George Cooper spent years in a marriage where he was consistently dismissed, occasionally humiliated in front of his children, and outright disrespected in moments. The show plays for laughs that aren't funny when you slow down. Mary's relationship with Pastor Jeff, her emotional investment in church community, the way she spoke to George in front of the kids, the way she spoke about George to Mima, none of it reads as the dynamic of a marriage that was working. George stayed. George showed up. George was patient past the point where most people would have stopped being patient. The theory says the affair, when it comes, isn't a man choosing betrayal. It's a man who had been invisible in his own home for so long that the first person who actually saw him became something he couldn't walk away from. That doesn't make it right. The theory isn't exonerating George. It's saying the story the show told about that marriage was always Mary's version, and young Sheldon is Sheldon's version, and George, who never got to narrate anything, may have had a version of his own life that neither of those stories left room for. Paige Swanson doesn't exist in The Big Bang Theory because she didn't survive long enough to be there. Paige is Sheldon's intellectual equal, maybe his superior. Introduced in Season 2 as a child prodigy whose life starts collapsing in real time as her parents' marriage deteriorates, she starts drinking. She starts pulling away from school. She starts disappearing. The last time the show shows her, in Season 6, she is in a genuinely dark place, and nobody around her seems equipped to reach her. Then she's gone. She is never mentioned once in The Big Bang Theory. Not by Sheldon, not by anyone. For a man as self-referential as Sheldon Cooper, who catalogs every slight and every significant relationship with archival precision, the complete absence of Paige Swanson from his adult life is not a continuity oversight. It's a silence that means something. The theory says Paige's arc in young Sheldon was always heading toward one conclusion, and the show was too gentle to show it directly. The drinking, the isolation, the erosion of a brilliant girl's relationship with the identity she was built around, all of it tracks as a portrait of someone falling. Sheldon's inability to mention her in adulthood maps perfectly onto a grief he cannot process, a face he won't look at directly, a name he has filed away in the same place he filed his real memories of his father, somewhere deep enough that the surface stays clean. The show gave Paige 9 appearances across 5 seasons, and then let her go quiet. The theory says that's exactly what happened. Meemaw accidentally built the version of Mary Cooper that made Sheldon's adult life so much harder, and she has no idea she did it. In the Young Sheldon finale, after George's death, the Cooper family watches Mary spiral into religious obsession. She attends church 3 times a week. She demands Sheldon and Missy be baptized. She is grief in the shape of a woman who has replaced one certainty with another. And when her grandchildren go to Meemaw worried, she gives them the line that changes everything. She tells them to give Mary time. She tells them she'll calm down. Meemaw was wrong. Mary didn't calm down. Mary got more devout, more rigid, more closed off, more certain every year, until the woman in The Big Bang Theory is barely recognizable as the person young Sheldon spent 7 seasons showing you. The theory says that single moment in the finale was the pivot point. If Meemaw had intervened instead of reassuring, if someone had sat with Mary in her grief rather than waiting for it to pass on its own, the Mary Cooper of the future might have been reachable. Instead, they gave her space to build walls. And by the time anyone looked back, the walls were load-bearing. Meemaw, the character everyone in the Cooper family leans on as the cool one, the sharp one, the one who sees clearly, made the one call that cost them the most. And because she said it gently, in a hallway, in a way that felt like wisdom, nobody ever held her to it. Adult Sheldon is narrating young Sheldon as a memoir, and he started writing it because Leonard was already gone. The show frames Sheldon's narration as a warm, retrospective look at his childhood. Jim Parsons' voice, wrapping around each episode, like a man who has lived long enough to find the humor in what once hurt. But fans noticed something in the Young Sheldon finale. Sheldon and Amy name their son Leonard Cooper, and adult Sheldon's narration throughout the series carries a specific emotional weight, the weight of someone who is not just remembering, but preserving. The theory says the memoir is grief work. Sheldon, who processes loss by creating systems, who responds to pain by building structures around it, started writing because someone he could not bear to lose was already gone. Leonard, the man who tolerated him before anyone else did. The witness, the person whose apartment was the first place outside of Texas that felt like a home. Young Sheldon's narration isn't nostalgia. It's Sheldon reconstructing a world where everyone he loved is still alive and the story is still going. Including George, including the real George, the one he loved, and then spent decades misremembering because the love was too big to carry any other way. He named his son Leonard. He wrote a book about his childhood. He gave the Nobel speech that finally said thank you to the people who deserved it. Adult Sheldon Cooper spent his whole life being the person who didn't need anyone. The memoir says otherwise. Every page of it says otherwise. The whole show is a love letter written by a man who didn't know how to say it out loud. And the people it was written for never got to read it. George is dead. Paige is gone. The house in Medford is sold. The family scattered in directions nobody chose cleanly. And somewhere in Pasadena, a man who spent his childhood being the most important person in every room sits down and writes the story of the people who made him possible. Not the Nobel Committee version. Not the version he told for decades where his father was less and his family was background noise. The real version. The one where George drove to Houston, where Missy understood everything and said nothing, where Mary prayed because she had no other language for that much love and that much fear, where Meemaw played poker with a 9-year-old boy because she saw something in him that nobody else knew how to hold yet. Young Sheldon is what Sheldon Cooper remembers when he finally lets himself remember correctly, not the performance, not the coping mechanism, the truth, which is that the Coopers were not a perfect family. They were not even a particularly functional one, but they were his, and he spent decades pretending that didn't matter because the alternative, admitting how much it did, was the one equation he could never solve. The show ends. The memoir is finished. And somewhere in East Texas, the snow is falling on a house that used to be full. Subscribe. There are more of these, and some of them hit even harder than this one.